Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the workshop. I'm Coach Ken with Peak Multisport, and today we're talking about tubeless tires. The reason I'm making this video is because I've been talking to a lot of my personal athletes about the pros and cons of the various tire systems out there. And a couple of them are thinking about or wanting to go tubeless, but as is human nature, a little fearful or hesitant of the things that they don't know about. So what do? We jump on YouTube and try and sort through all the material out there. In the last few weeks, I'm trying to provide videos for my athletes that help give them a visual of best practices for tubeless tires and grow increasingly frustrated throughout that process. And so my goal is to literally make this the best road tubeless video on the internet. The reason I got so frustrated about it and decided to make a video myself is because a number of things. One is videos are either pushing a sponsored product, which may or may not be the best solution, or they may just be trying to condense the video, which I appreciate. Obviously long videos typically don't get a lot of looks or a lot of likes, but they're skipping over a lot of steps. And then worst of all, just outright giving bad or the wrong advice. So I took it upon myself now. I have a set of tubeless wheels, and I'm going to set them up from scratch with these nice fast Corsa Speed tubeless tires. And not only that, we're going to talk about best practices moving forward. So we're going to talk about the installation and how to do that best and optimize performance and minimize, or maximize the flat protection, if you will. We're going to talk about how to maintain it. What do you need to do? I also have some pro tips or hacks that I almost guarantee you haven't seen before, at least one or two in there, even if you're familiar with tubeless tires in the process. So hopefully I'm giving you some information, even if you're an old vet with tubeless tires. We're going to talk about how to maintain them. Then we're going to talk about how to travel with them. And I've heard a lot of other videos say they don't travel with tubeless. You can travel with tubeless and travel easy. You just need to know a few little key things to do and how to travel with it. We're going to talk about that. And then finally, what does your flat kit look like? So if you get a flat that is not, that the sealant didn't seal up, meaning it's a big puncture, what can you do about that? And so we're going to talk about what your flat kit, how it may look a little different than if you're running tube tires. So those four components are going to make this video. Without further ado, it's going to be a long one, guys, so hang with me. If you're interested about tubeless installation and maintenance and setup and travel, this is going to be the video for you. So watch and let's dive in. Here we go. Here's a quick look at some of the supplies you'll need. We'll talk about each individually as we go through the process. All right, so first things first, we need clean surfaces to work with. So we need clean tires, clean rims. And so I had actually used these tires before with latex tubes, and I powder all my tubes. So I needed to make sure that with some warm soapy water, I cleaned the inside and the outside of the tires so they're ready to mount. And then also, let's talk about the rims themselves. So I have a hooked tubeless system. So what that means is it's actually kind of, there's two really main tubeless systems out there. One, it's hooked, which acts like this. So this is the tire, this is the rim, they literally hook together. There's hookless, which you can imagine is just flat. That's been in the mountain biking world for a while, kind of new to the road scene. So just make sure your tires and your rim are compatible. Now what we'll see, I want to show you actually, if you kind of look real close, a tubeless ready wheel doesn't actually mean it just comes ready to throw a tire on. There are some steps in the process that we're actually going to do. You got to put some tape down, make it airtight, that kind of stuff. But tubeless ready means that it will accept tubeless wheels or tires. And so what that means is that it's compatible with the proper tire so that you can get that good hook system and the tire won't come off the rim. So that's what that means. Now this is a great example. Obviously, with all these valve holes exposed, that is not a tubeless ready system. So what we need to do first is clean this system off and make sure everything is super, super clean so that we can get a good seal of the tubeless tape that we're about to put on there. So what you can do for that is first, you can use these little alcohol wipes, but they kind of run out pretty quickly. You'll need a couple of them per wheel. You can use alcohol, you can use mineral spirits. I actually have an electronic parts cleaner that I like to use because it dries super, super fast. So that's what I'm going to use today, along with these shop rags, because these shop rags don't leave lint behind. So any clean rag, any clean cotton cloth, or a shop rag like this works really, really well. And you may say, well, if this is brand new, it may come out clean, ready to go. But let me show you why. And I'm actually going to go through the process here. And I'll fast forward the parts that are just kind of repetitive. But I want to show you first. So I'm going to spray a little bit onto the rag. And I always start at the valve hole as a point of reference, so I know where I start and I stop. But just a quick little wipe, you can see kind of the leftovers from the factory coming off of that. So I'm gonna go through and clean this thing off. I'll spray this rag a couple times and just get it to, it doesn't need to be spotless, but get it to the point where I'm not getting a lot of gunk coming off the wheel. Also, we want to clean down in the channel here. We also want to clean up under the hooks best we can. So I'll kind of push the rag in there and make sure we're getting every part of it clean best we can. So that's what we'll do now. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So I went over everything thoroughly, and then just as a double check, I went over it again, and you can see I'm getting a little color there, but not much. So we'll call these rims clean and ready to go. Now, if your product is still wet, meaning if you're using like an alcohol or a mineral spirits or something like that, and it's still wet, this needs to be thoroughly dry before you tape it. The electrical cleaner dries instantly. So I know this is already ready to tape, but if you have something that doesn't stay dry, make sure it's fully dry before you begin the taping process. Now for the taping process, how do you know what size tape to get? Well, what we're looking for is 1 to 3 millimeters wider than the internal measurement of the rim. You can get that from the manufacturer spec. You can actually get a ruler or a tape measure and literally just measure the inside of the rim, how many millimeters from inside edge to inside edge. A kind of a quick reference point is you also want to make sure that it doesn't fit inside. If it slides down in between in the wheel well, then that is not what we're looking for. So it should be wider than the actual tire. So typically, again, 1 to 3 millimeters wider than the internal dimension here. The reason for that is, again, if I show you this internal channel, that takes up some depth. So we want to make sure that it is fully seated inside this depression, that channel, if you will, and we want it to kind of come up into where the bead is going to attach, but not actually into that kind of vertical, where it starts to go vertical again, okay? So we want it to be mostly flat. If it starts to go vertical, that's okay, but we just don't want it to inhibit the where the bead interfaces with the wheel, okay? So that's it. So to start this process, we know we have a clean, dry tire now. I actually like the muck-off tape. A couple reasons. One, it's translucent, so you can see what you're doing. But it also just has good adhesion to it, and they have multiple sizes that are available. So I'm going to find my valve, again, as a marking store, and then for tape, we're going to start on the opposite side, okay? So we're starting on the opposite side, and I'm going to start this tape in the middle, in between where the valve holes are. And again, the purpose of this is to make this system airtight, and this is a sticker that I'll use to finish it off at the end. And I have my scissors at the ready. Now, it's if you have a wheel chewing stand, that's how it works best, but just for the sake of demonstration purposes, I'm going to do it on the floor, as many of you guys probably will as well, just so we're kind of showing the same thing, learning best practices. Now, as I'm taping, I'm going to try and show this best I can to you guys. So we're starting opposite the valve stem, and the best thing to do is kind of pull out maybe 6 to 10 inches, and that way it stays nice and straight. And when I place it in there, I want to make sure that I place it centered and press it all the way down into the wheel well. We don't want it to cross the gap where that depression is. We don't want it straight across. It needs to go down into the depression here and be fully seated all the way around. So I have a good seal there. Now I'm going to pull it, and I can kind of wiggle it into place a little bit, and then push as it goes around. And I'm making sure just to seat it really, really well. I'm going to flip it around. Let's try doing it facing you guys and see if that works. And again, part of this translucent, with its translucent, I can see if it's making good adhesion, because if I see, I can see where it connects. I'm going to show you guys. So I can see here it's darker. I can see that it's pressed in there, and I'm trying to eliminate any air bubbles, versus here where it's not attached to the rim yet. You can see it's obviously not stuck. So that just helps me visually making sure I'm kind of getting a good seal. So I'm pulling out 6 to 8 inches and then running my finger in the depression to make sure it's fully seated, and then I'll come back in and press the edges after the second round. But again, just trying to eliminate any air bubbles, pulling tight with my right hand as I'm pushing it down with my finger with the left hand. Okay, now I'm getting to the end here. And if I were doing a mountain bike tire, this is where I would stop. I'd overlap a couple inches and stop. But because this is a road bike tire, the higher air pressure requires 2 layers of tape. So right there, we've already ruled out about 75% of the videos that I've seen on the internet. 2 layers of tape because of the higher pressure required for road tires. What that means is the actual higher air pressure will push the tape down in through the little valve holes, or the spoke holes, and then actually the tape will break and just become fatigued over time. So 2 layers of tape. Here we go. Let's go back around. Continue to press those air bubbles out as you go. All right, so here we are. I was actually just double checking, and I think I actually went over, I did about 2.5 rounds of tape. So, because I've gotten back to the valve hole. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually just gonna stop short. I'm okay with that. A little more is not gonna hurt anything. And I'm gonna use scissors, not a razor. I'm not gonna tear it with my teeth. We want a nice clean cut. I'm gonna make sure I cut it in between the spoke holes. Okay, so just a nice clean cut. And then apply pressure as I continue to run my thumb down, get rid of any air bubbles, and just give that a nice good push. Now I'm going to go back around and seat the edges here just with my thumb. I'm just going to kind of go back around a second time. You can kind of hear the air bubbles kind of popping out, and that air will either get pushed out the sides or pushed down through the spoke holes, and that's what we're going to get rid of. All right, there we go. So now I have gotten most of the air bubbles out. I either pushed them out to the side or down through the spoke holes. Because of the 2 layers, you can't push it right down through the spoke holes if you're working an air bubble out of that second layer. So you have to kind of work it out to the side. But again, it doesn't need to be 100% perfect, just pretty good. So now, oops, that's my dirty rag. Let's not use that. Let's use a nice clean shop rag. And this just helps things slide a little bit better rather than using my finger or my skin. And then I'm gonna really kind of push it into the crevice underneath of the hook on the rim, and then just kind of push down so I get a good firm seat right under the hook where that tire is gonna bead, where the bead's gonna install. All right, now we have a nice firm seal, and really we could leave it like this without using the extra sticker, but Muck-Off sends this nice finish sticker to put over the last layer, and that's what we're gonna use. So I'm gonna push it right down in there. Actually haven't used this before, so there we go. Just to finish off the job. And we're gonna make sure that is pressed down in there, nice and snug. I'm not sure if this really makes it better or if it's just advertising, but either way, I'm gonna follow instructions because I'm a rule follower and make sure that is seated down in there nice and tight to finish off the job, okay? So that is the taping complete. All right, let's talk about valves. Now, before you install the valve, part of your valve purchase decision, don't just run whatever the wheels came with and assume that's going to be a good valve for you. A couple things at play here. One is you need to make sure it's long enough so that it extends, when installed, that it extends about 2 centimeters past the valve opening. So for example, this is the stem we're going to install. These are the Vision brand stem that came with the wheels, and it is specifically designed so that it will stick out about 2 centimeters more than the top of the rim so that you can attach your pump properly. A lot of times we see athletes maybe just kind of use what they have or don't pay attention to it, and they're stuck with a valve that doesn't really stick out far enough and doesn't work well. Aside from that too, when it comes to maintenance, and we'll talk about this during the maintenance phase of this video, but this is an injector, which you're going to use to stick down inside the valve to either inject or remove the sealant. The problem comes into play is that if this, and this is just one way to do it, you can also just pour it right into the tube, but then you have no way to check your sealant level. So as part of the maintenance phase, we have to prepare, but think about that when we're making our valve buying decisions. So to that point, what we're going to do is when you're checking your levels, either after the tire is already installed or when you're just putting them in, we want to make sure that this, the piece of the injector fits all the way down through the valve, like so. So what that allows you to do is stick it down to the bottom of the tire and retract any old sealant out, or also just check how much sealant is left, because sealant dries out over time. So you want to know how much is in there at any given point in time. This allows you to check the levels without having to unseat the tire bead, which, as anybody who has run tubeless knows, that is just the biggest pain in the butt. So to that point, here are examples. So these are stands valves, and sorry. Oh, that's as far as it goes. It doesn't even go part of the way in, because what you see here is, look at the hole on the bottom of that. It's not wide enough for the tube to fit in. So even if you could get it part of the way down, it doesn't go all the way through, and that's with the valve core removed, obviously. But this is a Lazine brand valve, and it fits all the way through. And the Vision brand also, and I'll just stick it from the bottom side here so I'm not taking the right apart, but it sticks through as well. So I can go all the way through the valve to measure the levels, and also just to inject it the first time. Keep things really, really clean, because if you don't do that, a lot of times these valves will just get gunked up with the latex as it dries over time. And these are easy to replace, the valve cores, so it's not really that big of a deal. But again, we'll talk about that more in the maintenance phase, but that's part of the valve buying decision. So we know that our injector will fit all the way through, so we can go ahead and install these. How we do that? Take either a pick or a hole punch or a small little screwdriver. In my circumstance, don't use a straight edge device. The reason being, you want a round hole that this valve is going to fit into. So if you can envision, this is a little rubber grommet, basically a little rubber grommet around there, and we want that to fit nice and snug. We want that tape to be nice and snug all around that. So we'll look for our valve hole, and as a little trick, I like to stick the screwdriver kind of back up through, just so I know exactly where that hole is. Make sure I'm going to kind of mark it with my fingernail so that when I stick this back through, we know it's going right through the middle of that hole, and that's it. So we've just stuck the screwdriver through the tape. You can wiggle around a little bit if you want to, but look how small that is. That's all you need. You actually want it smaller than the valve, because this valve is going to push right through, and it's just going to expand and be a nice, tight, snug fit. You don't want to open it up too much. Again, I've seen some other videos that say you need to open it up really wide. That can cause problems. So we're going to put this right through the hole, just like so. Push it right down through, and it's nice and snug, which is what we want. And then depending on the valve type you have, you notice, look at the shape of this one, how it's kind of flat on the top and the bottom. I want to make sure that it's aligned with the depression in the rim so that it sits down there nice and snug. So if it gets rotated on you, not a big deal. A lot of times it will kind of work its way down to that direction anyways. So, and I'll just push it down pretty firm, and I see that rubber grommet. Now, when I put the valve nut on there, this just secures the valve into the rim. I want to avoid using any tools for that. We just want it to be finger tight, because if you get in a jam and you're traveling or you're on the side of the road or something, you need to mess with the valve. If you don't have a pair of pliers with you, you're not going to be able to get it off. Also, finger tight, because these have little rubber grommets on them, finger tight's all you need. Okay, if you over tighten it, it can actually push or fatigue the rubber pieces and make them not last as long. So the valve nut here comes with a little rubber O-ring that goes underneath of it, and that allows a nice tight compression, but also protects your rim a little bit so your rim doesn't get all scratched up. So we'll put that rubber grommet on there first, and then just thread this valve nut on there, and then we'll walk it on nice and snug. And again, avoiding the temptation to over tighten it. We just want, we'll call it a good firm finger tight. That's about it. And there we go. That's good enough. Okay. So that's on there. Now, on to the next step, which is, oh, actually, nope, sorry. Next step is seating the tire. So we have the rim taped. We have the valve nut, or the valve in there, nice and secure. The next step is to mount the tire. So let's go on to that. All right, so the next step is to install the tire. Now, tubeless tires can be notoriously difficult to install. So as part of that process, just to have on hand, tire levers work well, and you don't have to worry about pinching a tube now because we're not using a tube, so tire levels work fine. I prefer, this is called a tire bead jack. It's just a tool. My specific one is called a cool stop. It's a tire bead jack. Helps you get that last little bit on the tire if your tires are difficult to mount. Ideally, you don't have to use any tools at all, but again, tubeless tires are notoriously stiff and hard to mount, so I'm having that on hand just in case. I also have some soapy water in a spray bottle. That can help kind of lubricate things to help the process along if we need it. Okay, we're also going to use that in another step later on, but I'll show you more about that later. So, as always, we're going to check the direction. So first, you want to make sure if your tires are directional specific. So for example, on my road bike, I have GP 5000s, and they are directional specifics. They have a little arrow on the sidewall that shows you which direction they're supposed to mount. So in this situation, typically you want the logo, and most wheels are you know, you can bi-directional, you can use them. It doesn't matter which way they roll, they're going to roll fine. But typically you line it up with the logo on the hub. So if you're looking at the logo to be vertical as you're looking down at it, and then that would be forward. And then if the arrow is pointing that way, you know rotationally that's how you want it to mount on the rim. So with these, the Corsa Speed tires, they are not directional. You can flip them around and install them however you want. So that kind of makes life easy on us. So what we're going to do is just start it here, and always want to start with the logo centered on the valve stem. So here's the valve stem, and we want the logo centered on there. And some people will tell you, oh, it's so you can see, you know, mark where the holes are, and if you get a little puncture, it's a point of reference. And that is partially true, but more than anything, it's just a good pro look. So that's what we're going to do. And then once I got it started there, make sure it's centered up. I'm going to push. And we want the bead of the tire to stay down in this channel so that to provide as much slack or clearance as possible. Because if it's sitting up nice and high, it just makes everything really tighter. So we're trying to make it as loose as it can possibly go to get this thing installed. And then some people also will start on the other side because they just want to start on the opposite side of the valve. That's fine. Your preference is okay. So I'm just going to take it and kind of push and push and push and push. And I think this first one will probably go on pretty easy with my thumbs. And all I'm doing is I'm taking the bead, I'm just pushing it over the edge of the rim, and there you go. First layer on. So that one easy. Hopefully the second bead goes on just the same. I'm not holding my breath though. And so now that's pretty much centered, and as you can see, it's nice and tight, so it's staying in the center channel because it's pretty snug. Now we're going to put this other one in. So we're just getting it started and putting it inside the rim, and I literally will do the same thing, just pushing all the excess with my hand. I'm pushing down, kind of feeding it on, pushing it down some more, feeding it on a little more at a time. And again, hopeful, but not holding my breath, that I can get this on tool free. And I could probably work that on, but I want to show you how the tire bead jack works. So I don't have a lot left here. I could massage that on with my thumb, no issue. So that's a thumbs up, super cool. But for the sake of the video, if you have really tight tires, I want to show you how this works. So all this is this gets stuck on the back of the rim, and then you push this down underneath the bead, and then you push down as you pry back. So I'm pushing it down so that it stays in contact with the rim, and then I'm going to use my thumb to make sure it stays under the bead. Sometimes you have to actually feed it onto that little lip there, and then I'm going to just pull it back. And there's one side done, and this one's probably gonna get it all in there. So again, I'm pushing this on the back side of the rim here, and then I'm gonna hand feed, see if you can see this. I'm gonna pull this out a little bit, just kind of make sure that ledge is underneath the edge, the lip of the tool is underneath the edge of the bead of the tire. And I'm pushing down to make sure it stays on the rim here, and I'm just gonna feed it back. Oops, and it's slipping out a little bit, so I'm gonna push down a little more with this thumb and feed it right onto the edge of the tire. And there we go. So that is tire fully installed. So now it's on there. Now to make sure everything's kind of nice and clean, I'm just gonna go around and pinch and just make sure that everything is seated where we want it. Nothing's hung up. I also want to make sure here that where the valve is installed, that the bead is on either side of the valve, and it is, because that was critically important when we go to inflate the tire, because as you can imagine, if the bead is pulled off to the side a little bit, that air is just going to go flow right out of this hole, okay? So we want to make sure that the tire bead is on either side of that valve, and now that I've misplaced it, I'm going to have to push it back where I want it. And there we go. That's okay. All right. So now this thing is installed but flat. Now before we put the sealant in, we want to seat this tire into the rim. And what that means is, remember we talked about that interface, that connection. So right now nothing is in place. So what we're going to have to do is force a lot of airflow into this area, the hollow, basically the flat tire, and we want to push it out so that it gets seated in the tire before we install the sealant. Reason being, that just makes everything a lot easier and reduces the gaps where the air is going to flow out. So because it's not airtight right now, we want everything to get airtight, okay? So you saw how the tire was just loose on the rim. We want to snug that up, and to do that, we just need a lot of air really quickly. Now, typically speaking, the harder the tires are to mount onto the wheel, the easier that seating process or that bedding in process is going to be. The easier it is to mount, and these were pretty easy. I suspect this is going to be pretty loose, and I'm going to have to either use a compressor or, we'll talk about this in a second, a booster tank to help the process, okay? So let's, for the sake of fun, not fun for me, fun for you guys, let's talk about how to get airflow in here. Now, the valve core, we want more air to flow than what this will limit us to. So now, before I pump this up, I'm going to take this valve core out so we have a nice hollow hole for the air to flow through. Let's talk about valve tools for a second and how that works. So valve tools, the valve core, which I'll show you here, the valve core, this silver piece is removable. And how that works is their valve tools can take any number of shapes. So this is a valve tool, same construction, just a different color. The Lazine stems, pretty cool. Their valve cap actually has a valve tool built into it. This is what you see most of the time when they come with valves. It's a little plastic valve tool, but you don't need these super tight. So a little plastic piece like this works just fine. So what I'm going to do is line it up. There's little flat spots on there. I don't recommend using pliers for this. Use a proper tool, and all I have to do is untwist it, and it's just finger tight, and then so that valve comes out just like that, nice and easy. Now we're going to have a nice hollow. When I do that on the wheel, we're going to have a nice hollow space for a lot of air to flow through. But I wanted to show you, just for those of you who haven't seen it before, gosh, that's hard to show, how that valve works. So it literally, that's all there is to it, okay? It just flows up and down and makes a little space for the air to flow into. And that's it. So now the air is flowing, and then you can see it sealed up. This is where the air flows through. Okay, that's it. So now that you know what a valve tool is and how to remove the valve core, I'm going to reinstall this one so I don't lose it. And then set that to the side. So I'll take one of my aluminum fancy valve core tools that I like, and these work a little bit different, because on these you just stick the end of it on, and again align it up the flat spot with the flat spot, and you just untwist. And then I've gotten it started. Now I can do the rest by hand, and it has fallen out. So now my valve core is removed, and there is a nice hollow hole for a lot of air to flow through. So set that to the side so we don't lose it. Let's see if we can get this thing to mount with a pump. Okay, so sticking that on there, tighten it down, and pump vigorously. Nope, not even close, not doing a thing. So, step 2 is to use a booster tank. Now, Milk It is my favorite brand of booster tanks. There's a lot of, so what you can do, there's actually tubeless pumps on the market. They look like a traditional track pump, but they have big cylinders on the side. And what that actually works as a compressor tank. So you're building up the pressure, you flip a switch and a lot of airflow bursts out. So it instantly just forces a lot of air into the tire, expands everything out so it beds into place. This is a kind of do-it-yourself if you don't have a compressor at home or a track pump, which you're not going to want to travel with. But this option is great because you can travel with this. This is super lightweight, and if you ever need to do any of this work while you're on the road, this is what you would use. The beauty of this is it comes with a cap. So I literally use this as an aluminum reusable water bottle while I'm traveling. Just goes in the side of my backpack. And if I were to ever need it, it comes with this handy little dandy valve that you screw into place. And this thing is super lightweight. It weighs about the same as a plastic water bottle. And then just screw that on, nice and snug. And then at the top is a little bike valve. And then so you pump this up. It says up to 160 PSI. I usually pump it up to about 140. And then you push this onto the valve that we just undid. And then boom, all the airflow that you have stored up in here flows into your tire for your mounting process, or for the tire. Sorry, so I'm going to undo the valve here. That is free and clear. We're going to pump this up. And I will set it on the ground here, and then just pump it up to 140 PSI. Okay, now let's hope this works on the first go around. And I'm not using any fluid now. If this doesn't work, I have a step 2 in the troubleshooting process. Let's see if this works as it is. So I'm just going to push down really hard, and then all that air is going to instantly flow into the tire. Let's see if it works. And while I do this, I'm going to push down on the outside edges of where the valve is, because that keeps the bead on either side of that valve stem where it should flow in. So let's see how it works. Ooh, that got us part of the way there. It's not fully seated, and notice as soon as I pulled it off, I put my finger back over it. I got some parts of it seated, and what I can tell is, so for example, see how the air says kind of flush, and what we're looking for, you can look at the bead line here, and there it's attached, and here you can actually see it's still separated there, so it didn't seat in there, okay? So here it's attached to the rim, it's pushed in out to the rim. So two ways to go about this. So what we can do to help reduce our trouble, one is if you have a compressor, you can just use a compressor. Let me show you what that looks like real quick. So if you have a home compressor and you're doing this at home and you just want to make life easy on you, don't be afraid to use just these. You can buy these online for about 20, 30 bucks. This is a bike tube with a pressure gauge, and you literally just hook it on to the end of a compressor hose. So that's super easy. That's the easy way to go. But I realize most people watching this video probably will not have that. Or if you're traveling, I want to kind of show you the process of what you can do as a kind of a step 2 before you go to step 3 in the process. Soapy water. So the soapy water we talked about can also help mount the rims to the tire. This also allows you to kind of let things slide into place a little bit easier during this inflation process. It kind of prevents some of the smaller gaps. It actually just creates a little bit of a barrier, not as well as a latex sealant, but what we can do is just spray this around the edges. So I'm just spraying it around the edges where the bead will slide into place, and it kind of creates a little little air barrier, but also a little reduces the friction so that we can do this again. So I just, again, for the sake of what would you do if you don't have a compressor, I'm gonna fill that tank up again and then try it again. So here we go. All right, so now we have a little bit of water around the bead. We have our Milk It booster tank pumped up to 140 PSI. We're gonna do the same thing again. I'm gonna take my fingers on either side of where the valve is installed. I'm gonna press straight up and hopefully get the whole thing set in this time. Let's see if it works. And I think that might have gotten it. Again, when I pull that off, notice I'm covering with my finger here, because now I'm gonna take that valve core and real quick, I'm gonna take my finger off, put the valve core back in. Well, I lost all the air pressure, shucks. That's okay, we're most of the way there. So I had it kind of set in there, but it pulled off as soon as I let my finger off. That's okay, we're most of the way there, so I'm gonna go ahead and put this valve back in. And take my valve tool. And again, just, I would say, that's probably like 1, maybe 2 Newton meters, just kind of snug, not over tightening it by any means. And yeah, I got a couple of significant spots. So if I had a compressor to use, let's see if I would use a compressor if I was just by myself right now. But again, I suspect most of you watching will not have a compressor. So let's see if we can get this to seat now with the pump. Since we got it about 2/3 of the way on, let's just put a pump on there and try this again. Okay. Yep, getting a little air pressure. Again, pumping vigorously. And that's at 40 PSI. There's 60. Now, as it starts to go up, we may hear a pop. And that's okay. That's the tire bead setting into the tire. Or you may not hear anything. There's 90 PSI. And there's 100 PSI. So, at this point, I can hear a little bit of air flowing out somewhere, but because I can feel it too. I have sprayed the soapy water. That helps us identify where the air bubbles are. So we know this is mostly seated, okay, because we can see it's pretty well on the rim. We're looking at the bead line, and it is even all the way around on both sides. Another way to check is, let's see if we see any wobbles or depressions as we spin. That looks nice and smooth. No big lateral movements, no bobs up and down. So we know this tire is pretty much set in place. Now, these little air bubbles that you see coming out, that's where the sealant comes into play. So, on to the next step. Let's put some sealant in this thing. All right, so it's time to add sealant. Now, the tire is actually holding air pretty well, which is good. We know there's some little air leaks because you saw the bubbles flowing in. So we need to add some sealant to get rid of any residual little air leaks, but also to help protect us as we're rolling down the road. If you get a small puncture like a staple or a small nail or things like that, the sealant is what will fill that hole, and as it flows out, kind of like your blood clots, the sealant just dries and it stops the leak of air. So that's one of the beauties of a tubeless system, is just to prevent those kind of those everyday flats, if you will. Now, if you get a big gash in your sidewall or something to that effect, this sealant is not going to seal it up. If you get a big puncture, the sealant may not seal it up. We'll talk about what to do in that situation a little bit later, but for now, let's go ahead and get this thing proper. And I recommend the Muck Off brand for a couple of reasons. A couple things I like here about the Muck Off brand. So as we look close here, the first and foremost is it's CO2 compatible. So what that means is, if you're on the side of the road and let's say you've gotten a puncture, the sealant sealed it up, but because the higher pressure system here, if athletes are running anywhere from 80 to 110 PSI, that air is going to flow out really, really quickly. Now, if it does seal, but maybe you're running, it dropped down to 60 PSI or whatever it may be, that may be enough to get you home, or let's say it even ran flat. You can use a CO2 canister to pump it back up, but in other brands, a lot of times it can shock and or freeze and or dry out the latex in there, so the sealant. so the sealant will not work as effectively thereafter. So I like the CO2 compatibility of the Muck-Off brand. There's some other brands out there that are also CO2 compatible, but that allows you to use a CO2 cartridge and not destroy the functionality of the sealant. The other thing too, is if you look close here, you can kind of see, it's a nice pink color, so you can see where it is, not hard to find, but there's also some kind of blue flakes in there. I'm not sure if you can see it on the video, but there's small little flakes in there, and that helps the coagulation process. That's a blood term, I'm not sure if it's appropriate for latex sealant, but it just helps the clotting process because it gives a little more robustness as it comes out that hole, gives the latex sealant something to grab onto. And then also, this is kind of cool, I've never actually used it, but there's a dye detection in there, and they send this cool, in their kits, they send this cool little UV lamp. So sometimes you get a puncture and it seals up and you didn't even know you had a puncture. So if you are curious, you could just turn this little guy on and then walk it around your tire and see if that sealant has sealed up any of the holes. So kind of a cool little thing, not really practical from a functional standpoint, but just out of curiosity, can help you find some holes that you may not have even known you had. So how much sealant do we add? This is another kind of pro tip here. And typically recommendation for road tires, unless you're getting into big like gravel size tires, but any typical road tire, 23, 25, 28, anywhere from 30 to 60 milliliters of fluid should be in the tire at any given point in time. Now, okay, well, how do I know 30 or 60? It's basically, the more you put in there, the more puncture protection you have. However, anything over 30 milliliters increases your rolling resistance. So one of the beauties of the tubeless system is that you have a low rolling resistance, typically on par with a latex tube, but obviously you have the added benefit of the puncture protection. So when you, at 30 milliliters, that is kind of the minimum amount to still have some puncture protection, but also minimal rolling resistance. For every 10 mils above that, up to 60, you increase your rolling resistance 1 watt for every 10 mils. So if you put 60 mils in, then you're probably increasing your rolling resistance about 3 watts per pair, okay? So just keep that in mind. So I recommend having 30 milliliters in your tire at any given point in time. However, this is the initial setup. So what I actually recommend for the initial setup is to put in 70 milliliters. Why is that? Because in the initial process, this latex sealant is kind of creeping its way into every little nook and cranny, sealing up little holes, coagulating around the valve core here, or the valve stem that we've installed. And in my experience, it actually kind of takes up about 40 milliliters of that fluid. So typically, if you install 70, after it's set up for a day or two and you've ridden it a time or two, you're probably left with about 30 milliliters of fluid in your tire. And the only way to know that is really to check. However, we just saw it was a bit of a pain to get this tire installed. There's 2 really ways to check it. One is to deflate the tire, remove a section of the tire, and then physically look down in there, and then you can use your injector to suck that up and then re-inject new sealant, or you can use a measuring cup. Again, this is a Muck-Off 15 mil measuring cup, so you can use a measuring cup and pour it in. These Muck-Off pouches do have measurements on the back side, but it's approximate. I don't recommend using that. I like to be more exact than that. So that's where this KOM cycling injector works really, really well. Now, so basically what we're going to do is deflate the tire, remove the valve core, which I've already shown you how to do. We're going to take this extension, stick it down in the tire, and then inject the fluid. Now, if we wanted to measure how much fluid was left in the tire, same process. We don't have to unbead the tire. We just take the valve core out, stick this in, suck up whatever remaining fluid is in the tire, and then re-inject new, fresh sealant of whatever amount we want. So let's say you put in 70 mils and you just don't know. I don't want extra sealant. I don't want too little sealant. Well, just ride it for a time or two, let it set for a day or two, and then remove the valve core, take your injector in there, suck the sealant out, see how much you got left, and just put 30 mils back in. Problem solved. You're good to go. You have the optimal amount to still prevent flats, but minimal rolling resistance penalty for that, okay? So that's how we're gonna do it. Now, to install this sealant, what we're gonna do is I'm going to deflate the tire, take the valve core out like we've just shown you already, and then I'm gonna suck up 70 milliliters of fluid into this injector, and then stick it right down in there. And so I'm gonna do that process off camera, and because I've already shown you how to do that, you don't need to watch again. Actually, I'll just probably fast forward it. Yeah, I'll keep it rolling, and I'll just fast forward this part as I get set up. Okay, so there we can see that is 60 milliliters of fluid sucked out of this little bag, and it's almost empty. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this in because it won't actually hold 70. So I have to put one in, and then I'll top it off with 10 more. Now, as I deflated the tire, I felt a section of the rim come unbeaded. That's okay, because when we pump it back up, it should fill right back up again. So this part can get a little messy, so just be aware of that. So I'm gonna take my injector and put it down the valve here. Now, I don't want to install it here, especially if it's sitting on the ground, because as I push the fluid in, it can just come right back up the valve tube. So I'll put it at an angle, a slight angle here, and then just inject all that fluid back down in there. Okay. That is 60 milliliters done. Let's get the other 10 that I want. Yeah, that's pretty much empty. I'm going to open up a new package. Oh, also make sure you shake it up real well before you use it. Get all those particles spread out. And there we go. That is the extra 10 that I'm looking for. Let's stick that valve back in there again. And there we go. All right, so I'm going to set that to the side. I'll clean that up later. Make sure you rinse out your injector before it dries. So after you get done, that was one of the first things you do. Make sure you rinse that out. Otherwise, your injector will not work anymore because it will be basically sealed up from the sealant. So now that we have 70 mils of fluid in there, I'm going to reinstall the valve core. Again, just finger snug. Then let's see if we can grab my pump. We're going to pump it back up to give it some pressure. And again, all that fluid sitting down there at the other end of the tire, so I'm being careful not to push down too much on it. But just giving it a little, there we go. Now we can set it on the ground. And here, I have my tire now at 40 PSI. Here's a little trick. Push down on the tire, and then just, well, actually, that's probably too much. Let's let it a little bit out. I want the tire to displace a little bit, so I want to be able to push down on it and have it kind of push out a little bit, because that's going to allow, just like as if you're riding down the road when you're bumping down the road or whatever it may be, kind of displaces the tire just like you would if you're riding. So now I'm going to put a little pressure on it and then roll it a few times all the way around. Actually, I'm going to let a little more out. There we go. Yeah, now it's nice and soft, and I can kind of push down on it. I'm not pushing the rim all the way to the ground, but this just allows the fluid to kind of get in the little nooks and crannies just like it would as if you're riding down the road. Now that we've done that, let's put a little more pressure in. Now I'll pump it up to about 100 PSI. And I don't actually run it that high. It's just a random kind of a high number so I can see where the air is flowing out under high pressure. I typically, these are 23 mil. Actually 23 mil I would run at about 100 PSI. My 25 mil I probably run about 95 PSI. Okay, so there's 100 PSI. Take that off, close up the valve so it doesn't get damaged. Now, we shake, shake, shake. The way I like to do this, if you think about this, so what we're trying to do is coat the whole inside of the tire with fluid. Now, some people spin it, some people stand here and shake it. I actually like to give it a little tap on the ground, kind of a soft tap, because the gravity is going to carry all the fluid to the bottom of the tire. And then as you tap it, it kind of shakes and bounces all over those areas. So just like this. Now the valve stem is actually a notoriously sensitive area, so I actually kind of do that a couple times in a couple different directions, and I'll even shake it a little bit there. Now, just kind of, I'm waving it, I'm using centrifugal force to get the fluid back down to the bottom, and then just continue. I'll go all the way around. And that's it, okay? Now, let's see if we hear anything. I don't hear a thing. Okay, so that went easier than the rear tire that I did the other day. So I installed the rear tire the other day and just didn't have time to do both. But I had an air leak in that. So what I did in that situation is I took my soapy water again. This is kind of the third time we have potentially used this soapy water. So it can really come in handy. Spray that around the edge. And for today, I don't need it, but I'm just doing it as a double check, but also to show you guys. So if you remember earlier, before we put any sealant in, we had some air bubbles. We had some soapy bubbles kind of spraying out. And I don't see any right now. And if you have an air leak, that's a good way to identify it. Yeah, I think we're all set. Okay, so what I like to do is, because it is still new sealant, I'm going to let this sit for a day or two. I could really go out and ride it right now, but I like to let my tubeless tires sit for a day or so before I ride them, so that I know if there was an little air hole or little escape hatch that the air is trying to slip out of, this sealant has had time to get in there, dry up, expand, and the latex is doing its job. So now I have a nice clean tire, tubeless, fresh sealant. Also, after the first week or so, I'll go back in and check the sealant to see what the level is at and make sure that I'm optimized at that 30 milliliter level. But that gets into the maintenance kind of side of things, and I'll show you what that looks like here now. So on to step 3. That was the installation of the process. Now we're talking about how to maintain. But I've already kind of covered it, but I'm just going to show you what it looks like. All right, so this is the tire that I installed the other day. So this is the tire I did about 2 days ago. So it is set and sealed, and any sealant in there that has filled up those little crevices, all the little nooks and crannies, if you will, it should have dried up by now. So what I'm going to do is just show you how ongoing maintenance is achieved. Now, we've done our homework and we installed valves that make this process really, really easy and really fast. How often you need to do it depends on your environmental conditions. The hotter it is or the drier it is, the more often you should do it. I think a typical recommendation is anywhere from like 2 to 6 months. So as you do this process, you'll start to learn based on your environmental conditions how often this needs to be checked. I would also check it about a week before any important race, just to make sure that your fluid levels are optimized. You can also check it, if you're traveling, once you get off the airplane and unpack it. Sometimes if your tires become unseated or something like that, you may want to go through this process again. But what I'm going to do is just hang it up. And actually, first, before I hang it up, I'm going to use centrifugal force again and kind of make sure all the fluid is down at the bottom by the valve, which is where we want it. Okay, so just kind of pushing it all down towards the bottom. And then you can hang it up on anything. I'm going to hang it up on my bike rack here with a nice soft rag so that it doesn't get scratched up. And then we'll take the cap off. I'll let the air out, because we're going to remove the valve core. And you've already basically seen me do this. This is essentially the opposite of what we've already done for the installation process. So taking my valve core tool, removing the valve, as you've seen twice by now. Valve is out. I'm going to take my injector and feed it all the way to the bottom. Now that we have all that sealant at the bottom, and sometimes actually if you stick it too far, it won't pull up because there's too much suction on the actual rubber. So you may need to hold it off the edge slightly, but then I will just try and retract whatever sealant we have down in there. And if you start hearing it bubbling, like there, I'm getting some air bubbles, that means I'm pulling all of it out. Yep, starting to get a little bit of air, and let's make sure we're getting proper suction. Okay, and there we go. So as I pull that out, let's get rid of the air bubbles in there so I can get an accurate measurement. So I'm pulling it down a little bit further, and then I'm going to push it back up just until it comes out of the tube so that I can get an accurate measurement. So I'm just pushing the air out is all I'm doing. Oop, there it goes. Pushed a little too much, but ta-da, look at that. Right on 30 milliliters, which is right where we want it. So maintenance done. Now, if that was less than 30 millimeters or more than, and you just wanted to optimize your levels, just get the 30 millimeters back in there, put it back down in there, squirt it back in, and you're all set. So now let's take a clean cloth, shop rag, my go-to, wipe off any mess we have just made, wipe off the valve. Reinstall the valve core. And again, if your valve core starts to get gunked up and air is just not flowing in there really well, go ahead and replace it. They're super cheap. You can buy them in bulk. Easy peasy. Now it's about finger tight. Now let's pump it back up. Make sure it's still holding pressure. Make sure nothing didn't come unseated that we wouldn't want. Oops, wrong way. Oh, I'm going to turn it actually because I hear it pushing that fluid all around. The air's flowing right into the pool of sealant. So I'm going to move it to the side. And I'm not riding these today or anything, so I'm going to pump them up to about 80 and just let them sit. Tighten up the valve. Don't hear any leaks. Good to go. So I'm going to hang these up on the wall, and we're all set. So that worked out really well. The rear tire checked out. Oh, let me put the valve cap back on. But the rear tire checked out. I had put 70 milliliters in there. About 40 had gotten used up. Just filling all the little nooks and crannies in there. And then the new tire, we'll let that sit for a day or two. I may go ride them in a while, and because that can use up more fluid, just make sure it's all settled, and we'll double check the levels on that. But that's it for maintenance, okay? All right, so we have our tires installed. We know how to maintain them. Let's talk about travel. Absolutely, you can travel with tubeless tires. No reason to be fearful of that. Think about this. So a lot of people typically deflate their tires before they travel because they think that when they go up in the air, the reduced air pressure is going to make them blow up. It doesn't. It's not even nearly that drastic. You can let a little bit of air out, but you don't need to let them down more than like 10 psi, if that even, just based on the law of physics and air pressure. So think about that moving forward. You don't really need to deflate your tires. The reason that's important with tubeless is because it allows the tire bead to stay in the rim. You don't need to fully deflate them. That keeps all the fluid inside the tire. That keeps the the tires beaded into the rim really, really well. So what's my travel setup? It's super, super simple. And I'm wearing my backpack just as an example, because here is our booster tank / water bottle. So I keep that inside of my backpack and use it as a water bottle. The valve for that booster tank, again, it's a Milkit booster tank. The valve has this nice little fancy case, goes inside the water bottle. I will also put a tire lever in there. Let's see, in the other bottle, no, I'll put that one in there too. So here is the injector that I talked about. So in the injector, here is the injector. There's our valve tool. There's the soft, flexible part of the injector. Here is the rigid part of the injector that goes on the bottom. That's too long, so it doesn't fit in there, but I put those two in there just for safekeeping. Push that down. We'll slide that down into the water bottle. Everything fits in there nice and neat. That guy goes in there. And we'll put, now, when I'm packing my bike, perfect place to store those materials. And for, if you want to bring extra fluid, which I certainly recommend, I recommend bringing about 4 ounces of fluid. That's about 120 mils. So basically enough to fully redo a whole nother tire job if you needed to. If you use the Stans product, these little 2-ounce containers are perfect for travel. They're just self-contained. They fit, you can fit 2 of them in a water bottle, super easy. It's really, really easy to fit in there. If I'm being honest, I dump these out and put the muck off sealant in these bottles. And then that goes in that water bottle. And then boom, we're done, ready to travel. That's it, that's all you need. So everything fits really well, self-contained, easy to travel. I am gonna give you a little pro tip / hack on this. Now, if you noticed, so this injector and almost every other injector on the market, it comes with, this had a really long extension on the end of it. That's because I put one on there. So the one it comes with is only 4 inches long. It's about that long. So it is just long enough to do about a 55 mil tire, 60 mil maybe. Because if you think about it, so here's the depth of the wheel, and you got about another 2 centimeters here to get to the bottom of the tube. That's if we're trying to check levels, right? Another 2 centimeters here, another 2 centimeters here. So you can see that if it was only 4 inches long, it would barely reach the bottom. If I'm running an 81 or a 91 mil on the rear, it's not going to reach the bottom. So I made a longer extension for my injector. And what I did is I just ordered, it's a 3 millimeter semi-rigid tube. I'll put a link in the description below of what I ordered off of Amazon. It comes in a little tube like this. It's a 3 millimeter outer diameter and a 2 millimeter inner diameter, okay? And what I did is I cut a 6-inch length. You can cut out however long you want, but I just put a little smearing of Gorilla Glue around the outside. It fit in there, but it just wasn't airtight. So I put a little smearing of Gorilla Glue around the outside, and because Gorilla Glue kind of expands, you could really use anything. You know what? You may be able to use the latex sealant you're using for your tires. And just let it sit overnight so it dries and it's nice and firm. But I wanted to give you a nice close look up of what I did. Now make sure you don't put the Gorilla Glue in the connector piece because you don't want to block the flow of fluid, the airflow. Just a little smearing on the tube, insert it, spin it a little bit so it gets coated all the way around, and let it sit overnight. And then you have a tool that can check really, really deep rims. So that's what I use. Want to let you guys know about that. And now we're all set for travel. So the last part of this video will be what your flat kit looks like and kind of the tools you need in that. So let's talk about that right now. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention. This is in the travel pumps, obviously, but I definitely recommend any of you travel with your own travel pump. This is just what I like. It is the Lazine brand. It's very, very durable. I actually swapped out the valve on here with just a regular pump valve because it has the screw-on valve, and that can unscrew your valve core accidentally. Just a pain in the butt, so I swapped it out for a regular one. But has the key here is it has an accurate pressure gauge that you'll use to pump your tires up. So really encourage anyone to be self-sufficient. Don't rely on a bike shop because they're never going to be around when you want one. And what if you're traveling to a remote area that doesn't have bike shops prevalent? It's just obviously best to be independent. So your flat kit pretty much looks like this, and that's it. That's one of the other beauties of running tubeless. So what I do, and again, back to why you might want CO2, is CO2 with a valve tool, and I half thread it on there. I don't actually puncture it, but I just keep it threaded on there. I don't actually puncture the CO2 canister. And this is a flat kit, or it's a plug kit for tubeless tires. And so what that looks like is, here is one side that I just unscrewed, it's self-contained. Here's one side, that's just to clean up the hole. So let's say you get a puncture that's bigger than a staple, or the sealant didn't work. Something that's a bigger hole that you need to actually put a little plug in. So what I'm gonna pull out of here are these guys. So these are, some people call them bacon strips, but these are your plugs, okay? It's basically a strip of tar, is kind of what it feels like. And so this one side you can use just to clean up the hole. So you just stick it in there, kind of push it in and out a few times if you need to. You probably don't need to. And then the other side, let me put that back on. So I'm screwing this side back on. And then unscrew this side. This side looks like the end of a needle, okay? That's what it looks like right there. So all you do is you take out one of these bacon strips, these little tar strips, you feed it through there, okay? And then if you notice, look real close. One end is, let's see if I can get it to focus. One end is open, so it's open there. So you feed a bacon strip through, and all you literally do is push it down into the tire, being sure not to push through the rim tape, so you push at an angle a little bit. That bacon strip gets pushed into the tire, and then as you pull out, it releases and pulls away. So then you have this bacon strip basically folded in half, sticking out of your tire, but it has plugged up that hole. And the benefit there is that it can plug up bigger holes than what your latex sealant will actually. It just fills the space in. Then hopefully you have enough latex fluid in there that you can spin the tire, seal that up, then you pump it full of CO2, you're free and clear to go. If you want more details on how that works, there are actually plenty of videos about how to use these tools. So I don't need to waste time in this video doing that. You can look that up online. It's super, super simple. Basically just follow the process that I just described, and then use the CO2 to get your air pressure back up, and then you're off and running. Okay, that's it, or off and biking. But that's it for the video. So hopefully this video, I'm hoping I can condense it down so it's not excessively long, but that was really thorough. I wanted to cover the whole gamut from start to finish, to travel, to racing, to roadside flat repair, those kinds of things. So I hope you guys found that beneficial. If you do, please share it. I'm not here to be a YouTube. I made this for my athletes, but if other people get a benefit from this, I will list it publicly. That'd be awesome. Just hit that like button, and that's it. So as always, if you guys have any questions, or if this is, you want to maybe do something a little different, call me. We can talk about it if you're one of my athletes. If not, maybe leave a comment below. That's fine too. I'll get back to you. That's it. Thanks, guys. Tubeless tires makes you faster, less flats, and let's go ride bikes. See ya.